Do you have questions about priming for your race? Well, today on Monday Mindshare, we are going to have some talk about what to do the night before and leading into your race to have you primed for your best performance. Hey there, Coach Aaron here, host of SFuels Monday Mindshare, where we bring endurance and nutrition together to help you go longer. Today, we have Leighton with us, and the team is back together today. Leighton, what do you say?
That's right, and we're live here from the Kona Coast, just a little north of that, where we've got a few of us down here, a few of the ambassadors down here for the 70.3, which kicks off on Saturday morning. So amongst the lava fields, it's pretty tough.
I think when people are going to watch this, they're probably going to have a little bit of envy.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's not like this every day, I tell you, but when it's there, you take it. Absolutely. But yeah, it's pretty warm. By the way, the weather, it's looking like the wind is going to be not too dramatic for us, but things change here, 3 times in a day. So we'll see what happens. The wind is on our side right now for Saturday morning. Temperatures, mid, what's that, 70s Fahrenheit. So it's not too drastic right now.
How is the humidity out there?
Well, compared to North Carolina, it's really quite much the same. I don't feel much change here. I'm most concerned probably about the winds. We did a ride out on the Queen K, my son and I, 2 days ago, or yesterday. And there was some gusts that certainly moved your front and sometimes your back wheel around a bit. So we'll see what happens.
Nothing like tightening up every muscle in your body.
Yeah, that's right. Just before you do a half marathon. But anyway, so yeah, talking racing, I think we're going to have a chat about some of the pre-race techniques that obviously, all your coaching experience you've been giving, and obviously what we give here at SFuels from a nutrition perspective, but, many aspects of this, Aaron.
Well, and I think also it's a perfect time because you're going to be able to utilize some of these tools of the trade this week.
That's right. If they work, I'll be paying you a pretty sum of money. And if they don't, I'll be calling you. I'll be giving you a call.
Well, let's go ahead and dive on in. And really, I want to start with the night before race day. And I think that this is a very, very valuable talking point and might also, in a lot of ways, get overlooked in all the commotion that kind of goes on through the course of the week. I feel like sometimes this is where athletes allow the most stress to creep in because they don't plan that night before. Right. And once they check the bike in, depending on the race specifications and what you have to check the night before, once they kind of get that done, I feel like they feel like that process is over. But no, you still got to finish the day off and get a good meal in, get some rest in, avoid the screen time. So I want to take a little bit of time to I'm going to open up the question first to you and have you, what are some of the practices that you have done night before a race to try to prepare from a nutrition standpoint, from a readying the body standpoint?
Yeah, I think, prior to HRV tools, heart rate variability tools, I think it was very much a kind of try and see what would happen. And meaning like attendance to diet, attendance to what you do with screen time and things like that. But increasingly, we've been able to kind of measure some of this, and it's really personal, right? Whether that is, and I'm not suggesting this, but, anything from alcohol to music to sex, and all of these things can have a dramatic effect on people differently. And I think I would firstly say is that, experimenting on the night before of what you're going to do, probably not the great idea. Same way as we kind of prepare for a race, I think we are preparing for that. How does our body respond to music, to screen time, to social interaction, to just raw quietness? Some people don't do well with that. And certainly HRV tools, whether it's a watch or what have you, can help us to do that. Generally for me though, I try to avoid the screen time. I generally try to get to sleep earlier, knowing that I'm going to be up earlier also. For me, and we can talk more about it diet wise, but I do things that are super light on the digestive system. To me, that's typically fish. And if I am going to have some light starch vegetable, it would be really quite well cooked, so there's just not a lot of tax on the digestive system. And then plenty of fluids, and just try to avoid really high GI, meaning basically the glucose index in terms of how responsive, reactive. And it's not so much your insulin's going to be up by race time, but it's more that you're giving your pancreas a bit of a hit by giving it something super concentrated. I try to avoid all of that. So the night before is not the night to be kind of experimenting with sweet and spicy and poor fatty foods, but healthy fats, healthy starches, and keep it really light on the digestive system. I also am a believer on avoiding grains pretty much the week of race day, of race week. Even though not everyone is obviously gluten intolerant, not everyone has a problem with wheat proteins. But by and large, a lot of people have a mild reaction in the gut to grains. And I think anything you can do to just really, subtly sedate, in a sense, the gut from anything inflammatory is better. And grains is one of those things to generally stay away from. That means you're going to have to reach out for some of the other starches, potato, rice starch, what have you, which are just far less reactive to most people.
And that's a great point. And again, part of what we're trying to lead into is decrease all that inflammation and other reactive aspects. And by decreasing that particular piece, you are going to allow the body to decrease a little bit of that inflammatory response, which can be a deterrent to your best performance. So that's a very good point. And some of the other things you kind of talked of a lot about what I recommend for myself and a lot of my athletes going into that night before from a food and nutrition standpoint. We want to keep it super light. I tend to recommend fish for most of my athletes, unless it's just something that they aren't big fans of. But I still, if they don't like fish, I tend to recommend towards a little bit of a lighter meat rather than your porks, rather than your beefs. I tend to lean towards chicken in that standpoint, just because I feel like it's a little bit lighter in the sense of compared to the beef, compared to a pork product. I find that in a lot of cases, pork takes a little bit longer to digest and just kind of sits into the gut a little bit longer. And typically when you get into race day, the less that you have still kind of around, the better off you're going to be.
I think a lot of people too don't realize that fish, for a lot of people, has a mild, almost sedative effect. It has quite a lowering effect of arousal for most people, actually. And I think if there's one day where you need to kind of just settle down because of the anxiety of the race, it's the night before, right? So fish does lend itself to that, I think, pretty well.
Well, and to speak upon that, I've had a number of athletes leading in before I have been interacting with them. They talked about how poor they had a sleep the night before. And I do make that recommendation of fish. And I've noticed with those individuals, they've talked about having a little bit better sleep the night before. And I think that you bringing that up has a little bit of a piece of that puzzle per se. It allows them to kind of just find that maybe the parasympathetic stimulation in that sense to allow for a good night's sleep. So I do think that is something that has helped a lot of athletes that I have had exposure to that said, I don't sleep very well the night before. Well, of course, there's going to be some of that just based on nerves. If you can kind of control that with the food, if you go to the smorgasbord and eat everything that you possibly can, you're probably adding to that process, right?
Yeah. The other thing, we put a video out on this maybe a year and a half ago, and that is we had some testing done on. I mean, I've already mentioned alcohol. I think generally people realize that it's not the right time to have alcohol. But what we did test also was chamomile on its effect on HRV. And there's both research papers and some of the empirical HRV work that we did and had some of our ambassadors did. They could absolutely see on their HRV data as they took chamomile there, HRV numbers would come up, again, suggesting parasympathetic tone. And I think that's absolutely the kind of support we want going into race day. It has nothing to do with the sedative effect, meaning like, it's not like when you wake up race day, you got to have some type of sedative issue. It is at least what the HRV data would suggest. It is just improving parasympathetic tone. And that's certainly what you want when you're in those periods of high anxiety, whether it's race day, frankly, or other issues with high anxiety.
And I really, a lot of my athletes might not care for it, but I request that they kind of remove alcohol from their system over the 2 weeks leading into an event, just because I find that we're trying to recover, especially if you're taking the time to go through a taper. What are we trying to accomplish there? So by adding alcohol to the system, sometimes we end up complicating what we're trying to accomplish in the process of a taper. You got a duck behind you or something, so that's fun to see.
Yeah, I got there's a whole swarm of them around here trying to join in on this video cast. So
they're trying to get their face experience there.
They're bombing the video here.
But I do like to recommend that with the taper, to go along with that, to really remove alcohol from the system, just because I find that sleep's better. HRV responds very, very positively in that sense. So I think I agree with you on that that's a very, very positive piece to add in, or to avoid in the process leading into your race. Another thing that I like to recommend to my athletes is elevate your feet. You've probably spent a little bit of time, maybe not too much time, but a little bit of time, whether you're setting up your bike, spending a little more time at the expo than you probably should have, exploring a new area that you might be visiting to race in that situation. So one of the things I do try to recommend to my athletes, if they don't have the compression boots, whether it be Rapid Reboot, whether it be Normatec, there's a list of a lot of different ones there. But if they don't have that option, to really elevate their feet and allow some of the additional inflammation and fluid that is probably built up and followed the path of gravity down into the feet, have that kind of rush back into the lymph system and get moved around. So therefore it's not pooling up anywhere, and allowing you to really have a good circulatory system from leading those feet up.
Yeah, and just adding to that, I think most people are aware of, as you fly, obviously you're typically sitting down most of the time on the flight. That also is pooling into the lower extremities. That coupled with what is very common is high sodium foods on airports and airlines, and that also will hold the fluid. So you put all this together. Dave Scott used to talk quite a bit about that coupled with carbo loading, where in high carbohydrate consumption, you're having high sodium levels. You begin to have a lot of athletes going into a race morning with just holding a kilo or two of fluid. And starting the race, which can materialize in different ways, anything from lack of range of motion to inflammation, not to mention just carrying around another bunch of fluid for a race, which is not a great idea.
It doesn't turn. I mean, it's just we typically hear so many people talk about getting to your race weight, and just in the last week, due to the way that individuals eat, and also from the traveling aspect that you pointed on, adding those kilos, I mean, that really ends up kind of defeating the process of what you've tried to get to whatever that race weight might actually be.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's the obvious things that everyone looks at, like, a light massage or a sport massage or what have you. These things are great. Just again, test it out, because some people do react differently to that in terms of, when they get into race day, they find that what felt really good on the massage table was actually maybe a little bit overzealous massage work in some parts of the body. And it can stir up, in some cases, muscles. So I think just being careful and knowing, what you're getting yourself into with massage is important.
And to kind of add on to that topic, I know a lot of people will travel with rollers or trigger point balls and things like this.
The trigger guns now.
Percussion guns as well. getting a little too aggressive the night before is not a good idea. Typically that night before you want it to be more of a flushing. And what I mean by that is it's very, very light. You do not want to put full body resistance in a lot of that aspect on the roller. You don't want to put full body tension onto the trigger point. And you do not, especially on the percussion guns, you do not want to add like pressure that makes it feel super uncomfortable. It should just be a light grazing over the muscles, allowing for really what you're trying to do is stimulate blood flow in that sense. And if you go too hard in that sense, what you actually are going to do is start a little bit of trauma within the muscle, and you're going to cause that inflammatory response, which again, you don't want to go into race day in that sense. So really, if you're going to utilize these tools, it's great to do them the night before, like you said, Leighton. The problem is some people just go a little too aggressively. So you want to probably be more on the light side in that sense, rather than going too deep in that sense, I would say.
No, I agree. Totally agree with you. Spot on. So yeah, leading into race day, what's like, you know, we've talked at times and we'll touch on it again now on nutrition, but you know, I've had a lot of athletes ask this question of, look, I'm not about to win this race. A great finish is and all I'm after, and I've got a time in mind. So I think I'm just going to use the first, 5 minutes of the swim to, you know, let the race come to me, versus I've got to jump in and do warm-ups or whatever, stretch cords. What's your approach for yourself and for your athletes typically?
Well, we want to control as much as we possibly can. And sometimes in that feel it out for the first 5 minutes strategy, you see people freak out, or they have the claustrophobic in the water. There's some negatives that I've seen. I've seen more negatives come from that than somebody that's either utilizing the swim stretch cords or is able to get into the water a little bit before. Especially the cooler the water, the more I recommend of, if they give you the opportunity to get in the water, take advantage of it. Because in a lot of senses, when you go into a cooler water race, especially factor in like just with St. George, where you're at a little bit of elevation and you have cold water, there's a lot, you're going to possibly have that breath taken away experience, or you're going to have that little bit of shock. And I find that to be more panic stricken for a lot of athletes. So if you can kind of get that experience out of the way beforehand, know what you're getting into in the in-game scenario, I find that has a better result than just feeling it out for that first 5 minutes. So
it's really good.
I really truly recommend traveling for my athletes with stretch cords, utilizing the stretch cords before, getting that back muscle activated, getting the body moving at that point, because there are a lot of races that don't allow you in the water before the race. Stretch cords are a great option. If not, and they allow you to get in the water, by all means, hop in.
No, I think you're spot on. The mental model issue, I think, is really important, particularly like at the end of the day, we're trying to get through the swim without an elevated heart rate to anything drastic, right? And I think any of those things that can shock the body, i.e. cold water, i.e. something that's swimming in the water that you never thought was on the brochure that said there would be in the water when all these swimmers are in the water. These are things that can freak us out a bit. So I think just getting comfortable mentally is probably maybe just as much value as getting the blood flow out into the shoulders, the back, and the arms, etc. Obviously, if you're going for a time, it's a different story. You absolutely want to get in the water where you can. You absolutely want to use stretch cords where you can, just to get things moving. We talk at SFuels obviously also about an hour before taking some caffeine. We propose the Primed product more in the spirit of getting the mental, if you will, model ready to embrace the race, as opposed to be, fear the race. And certainly caffeine has the ability to certainly do that. It needs to be an hour before, just to get to, its peak levels before race start. So that's the other aspect, I think, on the mental model, Aaron.
And you talk about the mental model, and a lot of the times we hear caffeine utilized for an energy source. And typically for that, we want to add 2.5 to 3, milligrams per kilogram of body weight. But in the sense of adding it for the mental side of things, what would be your recommendation in that sense?
Most most studies would say that actually even up to point, why I say up to is there is a bit of a range, but 0.5 of a milligram per kilogram of body weight again. So you really don't need a lot if it's purely a cognitive function. So you'll see when we use tea or coffee, the reason why that works from a cognitive perspective every morning is because if you look at the average, and that's the problem with tea or coffee, it's such a broad range, and you don't know going to a race whether you just had 20 milligrams or 120 milligrams, but it's enough to certainly get the cognitive benefit. The preciseness of primed, where it's a measured dose, is that you can, again, in training, test and just make sure that what is best for you to feel at your best prior to the race, knowing that you haven't over dialed it. I mean, when we get into the race, to your point, where we do want to upregulate fat oxidation efficiency, we need to be in that 2.5 to 3 milligrams per kilogram body weight, and we would do that by having it in our hydration mix. But that hour before, if you can do the math, everyone can do the math on what their body weight is in kilograms, and basically just half that, and that's the amount of milligrams you would need to get the cognitive impact prior to race start. And the other aspect, Aaron, I should just say there, we commonly talk about the cognitive impact in the spirit of, like, you're embracing the race, you feel confident with it, you don't fear it. That's one aspect. The other aspect of caffeine and the aminos that we have in primed is around reducing the rate of perceived exertion. So, when you do start to pile on the intensity in the race, whether that is through elevation change or just pace and speed, your rate that you perceive, the difficulty of that is going to be depressed through the caffeine and through effectively dopamine. So that's the other benefit, which obviously for racing just makes a ton of sense.
Absolutely. And just to make individuals aware, in one sachet, there is 80 milligrams of caffeine in one sachet of the prime, just to give everybody that detail.
You got it. Maybe we can chat also. I know we've covered this in other videos, but it never hurts to touch on it again. And I know Dan has actually conducted formal research and published the research on this, but he has showed that as you start the morning too high in a carbohydrate, it does have an effect on blunting your fat oxidation ability. Not an issue when a race is 2 hours or less, because you've got enough on board to deal with that in terms of glycogen, liver, and muscle. But half Ironman, marathon, ultra marathon, Ironman, where it's much more extended periods of time, we don't want to do anything that's going to depress, right, our fat oxidation efficiency. So maybe we should just talk a little bit about some of the foods just to be really careful of on race morning.
I love that idea, because that is a topic that I have addressed with a lot of athletes. And when I've gone over what they did prior to working with me, I had to have a can of applesauce and some of these things that are really not just super high in carbohydrate, but super high in fructose. And that fructose is going to suppress your fat oxidation by quite a bit in that sense, because it is so loaded with that fructose and sugar. So one thing that I tend to recommend my athletes avoid on race morning is fruit and fructose and sugar in that sense. I just find that it in sense, people think it's a great idea because it's a carbohydrate. It's going to lead to increased glycogen stores. But due to the risk of that suppression, I avoid it with all of my athletes, because I find it to be, not only are we dealing with more of a slippery slope from an energy standpoint, I also recognize and notice that gut distress ends up increasing in those individuals that have had that breakfast with the high fructose.
Yeah,
it leads to more potential bad days. So I definitely, one recommendation, I avoid all fruit for my athletes in that sense.
Yeah, on race morning. I mean, I think there's a couple of things here. One is, like we said earlier, the night before, having bland starches, typically best grain-free bland starches. So, a cooked potato that then is cooled, or a cooked rice then is cooled. These things are going to have a very low reaction on your insulin response. So, typically insulin is half-life several hours. So by the time you wake up in the morning, it's not going to be a problem. But to your point, all of those starches don't have, the problems with fructose. And there's a gut issue to that. There's another bunch of studies there where they're showing where fructose actually downregulates the GLUT4 efficiency. And GLUT4 is that, transporter that helps take the glucose out of the blood efficiently into the muscle cells for oxidation. And, fructose downregulates that. So not only that's why we don't use it in SFuels products, but race day, there's so many other starches that you could be using to get just a sufficient amount of, and Dan talks about typically, race morning, keep it light. He talks about, 50 grams, which is actually quite a lot. But again, it's about what type of carbohydrate. I think generally my guidance is this is not about the breakfast before the race is not about the calories. It is about you having satiety, and you feel satisfied that by the time you get to race line to the start line, you don't feel hungry. You're sufficient in your gut, in your head. What happened the night before and the few days before, it's really what's going to dictate what's in your liver and what's in your muscles in terms of repositories of glycogen. So focus on those days before. Use the race morning purely to feel satisfied. Be light on the grains and the fructose. But things like eggs is fine. A little bit of dairy, not too much dairy. If you're going to have some dairy, mix it up with some, high fat muesli or granola, something like that. That where you're going to really try to balance any effect of that milk protein. You can use an almond milk if you're really sensitive to it. Oat milk, etc. These things are not going to have the problem. But yeah, eggs is fine, bacon is fine, avocado is fine. But like all of this stuff, need to test it pre-race day.
And the other point that I would also make is as an athlete, you've been with yourself your entire life. You are going to know what your system is sensitive to, and not taking in anything that you are aware of that your body reacts poorly to. If you have something that you consume that has you rushing to the restroom afterwards, probably not the best advice to utilize that nutritional product race morning.
Right.
So I still, there's a little bit of reliance on the athlete knowing themselves and how they react to things that they implement into their nutritional strategy as well. And like one thing that I recognize is that I love spicy food, but I typically don't incorporate it the week of race week just because it throws things off. This is something that I know about myself. Somebody else might be able to eat all the spicy food that they want to, and it doesn't affect them at all. So I do think making the recommendation to our athletes out there that knowing yourself a little bit as well and avoiding foods that your body's sensitive to is going to be, we would be doing an injustice without saying that, or telling them, if your body goes into this range, take it anyways. It's not going to work out well. So know your body and know what works, right?
Just having a bit of a camera adjustment here.
One of those ducks knocked it over, didn't they?
Yeah, probably. I'm just watching out for them here. Yeah, the other thing too, right, is that we travel to a lot of these race areas. It's not our home always the case. And, even water is something that you think water's water. And I think we see a lot of times where the local water is just different. Is different to the point that it's causing just a slight, gut irritation. I think, again, for race week, when you're traveling, is maybe grab some bottled water and stick to that, just so you're not screwing up 6 months of effort because the jolly water in the local area is just off with you, right? So it's another simple thing to take care of.
Yeah, one of the first things that I do when I touch down is make a run to the grocery store and grab some gallons and drop
Right.
them in the refrigerator just to make sure that that is
Yeah.
what I'm drinking from through the course of the week. I
Right.
think that
Right.
that's very, very valuable. The
Well, cool.
the other, I mean, outside of that, really, I think one of the other things that I would like to just say of race morning,
Yeah.
there's a heck of a lot of stress. You got a lot of things that are going on. So, like we had last week's video, we talked about testing, planning things out. This is another thing where I think taking the additional time to plan out what your breakfast or what your routine in the morning, this is going to be one of the most valuable times that you can invest to set up a plan in the morning. I would
Yeah.
even set up a plan B just in case things don't go according to plan because it's race day.
Yeah.
Sometimes that
Right.
doesn't happen.
Right.
So I think having a strategic process and being prepared to implement that process on race morning is going to set you up for a positive race day and a successful race day. So one of the things that I would think is setting up exactly how you would like the morning to go,
Yeah.
and then also setting up a couple of avenues if that doesn't go according to plan. So
Right.
therefore you can still manage the stress. I am not
Yeah.
somebody that sends their athletes into a race with a whole lot of stress. I would like to
Yeah.
decrease the amount of stress, but this is one area where I like them to be prepared on the front end, because when we get into race day, when that gun goes off, or even the 30 minutes leading into the time before the
Yeah.
race,
Yeah.
there's a lot of anxiety that can be around that time frame. So
Right. Right.
managing what you can, controlling that particular piece, I feel ends up ending in a more positive result than if you don't take the time and have that plan.
No, I think it's spot on, and I think a key point I've learned over the years is when you got your plan, right, share it with your family, right? Tell them what's going to happen on race morning with your breakfast, and you're probably going to be a little edgy. Tell them what happens between getting from the hotel room to the race start, what their role is, like not in a commanding way, but an informational way, so that everyone knows what's about to happen and it shouldn't be a surprise. It just helps to kind of downplay and, to your point, kind of put a little bit of structured understanding into what's going to happen. I love your concept there of, hey, have the plan B's ready, right? When the bus don't turn up on time, right? How are you thinking about that? How are you going to handle that? So anyway, I know for particularly the longer races where you do have a support team or a family member come out and be with you, either prior to the race or through the night of the race. I've had, families being there in the mountains in the middle of the night, and, spending time with them before the race and telling them could be how I come into the aid station. Don't be surprised, because they're surprised, you'll feed off it, right? So there's
Right.
all these things which I think just spending time with your family on what's going to happen, it just helps unload some of that, and by and large support you, right, as you go through the experience.
Well, and again, they're there. They want to support you. They want you to have
Right.
that. They've probably made a lot of sacrifices through the process
Totally.
as well. By
Spot
you
on.
kind of giving them a roadmap, you're also helping them to have a good experience on that day, because you're
Yeah.
going to be a heck of a lot more. You're going to be a lot better to be around at the end of the race if things go well, and you want to share that time with them. But I think that that's also another lead into, if you're traveling with mates and you're racing with mates, I also think that it's a very, very good idea to have these same conversations with them,
Yeah.
because
Right.
they're going to have their own idea of how they want race morning to go. You
Exactly.
typically might be sharing rides, you might be sharing, there's a lot that might be going on. So having that group
Bedrooms.
conversation. Yeah, exactly. So having that group conversation and having some plan as a group and as a team,
Yeah.
you're all going to have a better experience with that as well.
No, exactly. Hey, one last comment I would just have, and that is about race morning hydration. There's actually a whole book that was published by Professor Tim Noakes on, hyperhydration or overhydration. And, clearly when we go into these races, we need to be well hydrated, but there's a difference between being well hydrated and overhydrated, whereby, the body has no option but to start throwing off. In order to throw off an overhydrated state, it has to do that with electrolytes. And it's not uncommon to, see athletes for two reasons. One, being overhydrated, and secondly, there's a natural rise in adrenaline, obviously, with race starts, but particularly see this with marathons, is that within the first kilometer, there's a whole bunch of athletes off to the side of the road that are, urinating, etc., to offload. Part of that can be those two things. And it's not so much just the funny side of it, of these athletes having to stop in the first kilometer, but it's more so that you can begin to just offload then a bunch of electrolytes. So I think, again, in understanding what to expect on race day as it relates to heat and humidity, and then testing and training, how you're going to go into that in the race morning with how much fluid, and is it just water or is it water with some electrolytes, so like an SFuels train or something. But we should be having some electrolytes prior to race day. You should be coming in hydrated, but a lot of fluid only can result in unloading very quickly into the race a lot of those electrolytes, and that is going to cause problem further down in the race, both in digestion and obviously muscular control.
And that's a great point. I've seen athletes try to guzzle water in the morning. If you're trying to make up on that sense, you're already too late. But also what you're doing is, I almost kind of compare it to a floodgate, where if you consume water too quickly, you actually shut down the absorption and it just runs right through the system. So therefore it's actually never absorbed and taken in by the body. It's just moved through and, taken out of the body, like you were talking about. So on race morning hydration, it's just the sip process. You just want to take in nice and slow. It's there to just keep you on point for the day. It's not going to have you catch up for what you missed earlier in the week or what you think you need in that first part of the race. It's going to end up probably becoming excreted in a different manner.
Spot in. And even just like to have something to do with your hands when you're sitting around beside the race start, is just the nervousness of it all. It's just having something a little bit to sip on is great, right? To take your mind off it. So, well, hey, it's been awesome to chat. I think we covered a lot of ground there, and I certainly wish everyone all the best on their upcoming racing, and have an awesome pre-race week, a pre-race morning, and a race itself. So when's your next one yourself, Aaron? I know you're kind of working through some injury rehab right now, but anything you're kind of eyeing off and just kind of letting your eyes look at a little?
Well, I think with where I'm at right now, the next one will probably be a little bit of a shorter distance, just to see how, because the run is where the question is. So I want to make sure that I can perform the way that I really want to. I don't want to go out and have to run a race that I don't feel like is my best run. So I'm going to make sure that time has been placed, and I'm feeling confident that I can hold a nice pace that I feel like Aaron approved in that sense.
Capable of. Yeah, exactly. No, it makes a ton of sense. Well, all the best, bud, on your recovery, and looking forward to seeing you back at the start line, and same with everyone else on the Monday Mindshare subscribers.
Well, I know I'm speaking upon everybody. You go out and have a great race. I know you and Ryan are getting after it. So have a wonderful experience and go take on that course.
Will do. Thanks, guys. Good to see you. Talk soon.
Absolutely. And to everybody, we appreciate you tuning into this episode of Monday Mindshare. Don't forget to subscribe and click for the new content. So hit the bell. But again, I'm Coach Aaron. We had Leighton with us today. We want everybody to have a good one and go longer.